My name's Gracie Baruzzi. I am one of the directors of Nozama Dance Collective, along with my co-director, Natalie Shera. Jen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jen Kuhnberg. I'm the director of OnStage Dance Company, and we're a nonprofit performance organization for adults located in Malden, Mass. And very excited to be here with Gracie for our second webinar. And this is part of our overarching series, Empower One Another. And the whole point of this endeavor has been to promote collaboration between local dance companies and also some sort of skill sharing, as we've been calling it, and information sharing among the community. And so this webinar is the second of our series of 3, and we're going to be focusing solely on funding and fundraising today, which can be a really intimidating topic for a lot of people, but super important. So it's going to be really nice to break all of that down today and answer a lot of questions. So.
Yeah. Melissa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Melissa DeFriesse. I am a fundraising professional. I've been working in fundraising for about 10 years now, and my focus has primarily been on the arts. So I have a master's degree from Boston University in arts administration, and have worked for the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and for Greater Boston Stage Company, which is a theater in Stoneham, all in development and fundraising work. And I also am a member of OnStage Dance Company. I'm a member of the board there, and I'm also a dancer and a choreographer.
Amazing. Thank you for all that you do. And then Karen?
I'm Karen Krolak. I am one of the co-founders and co-artistic directors of Monkeyhouse. We are a nonprofit that connects communities with choreography, and currently we're based out of Malden, Massachusetts. And we've been really excited to be working in tandem with OnStage and with Nozama over the last couple of years on several of the projects that have taken place over at OnStage. And we are super thankful to be able to be part of this, and super thankful that the Malden Arts Council has supported so much dance within the community, so much so that I think we're going to soon designate our neighborhood as the Malden Dance Neighborhood.
Heck yeah. And Nicole?
I am Nicole Harris. I am the other co-founder / co-artistic director of Monkeyhouse. Karen kind of said everything that needs to be said about Monkeyhouse, but we are super pumped to be here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
thank you all for being here.
Yes, we have a really fantastic panel, and again, it's all people that we have collaborated with a ton in a variety of different ways. And as Karen pointed out, we're all based out of Malden in some way. Some of us, most of us live here and work here, and we're very happy to be supported by the Malden Cultural Council, who has partially funded a grant to be able to do these webinars and our Empower One Another series coming up later in the fall.
Yes, so for today, we're going to be working in a Q&A format. So Jen and I will be asking questions to Melissa, Karen, and Nicole. We're going to start out in the fundamentals and from a more micro level, and then really ramp up. So as we go through, definitely drop your questions. If we don't get to them right away, we'll definitely address them as that topic comes up. But we're going to be covering a lot of topics today. So let's dive in. Melissa's going to be starting us off, and Jen will be asking her the first question.
Yeah. So as Melissa said, she's been working with OnStage for years now. Dancer, choreographer, fundraising extraordinaire, and she has taught me so much about this topic already, and so I know that we're gonna have a really great conversation about this. But to kick things off, we were talking about the top 3 principles of fundraising. So let's go through what those 3 are and kind of dive into each one and what they all mean.
Sure. So Jen asked me this question: what would your top 3 principles of fundraising be for a dance company? And so I have 3 that are listed here, but the number one thing that came to my mind for dance companies specifically is the first point on the slide, which is verbalize your value. And so I use this example of, I actually currently work for a Boys and Girls Club. And so that's a very recognizable brand name that many people are familiar with. They pretty much know what Boys and Girls Club do, why they're valuable. So for me, it's actually at this point in my career, you know, it's slightly easier and different from working for the arts organizations that I've worked with previously, in that I don't have to work as hard to explain why what we do is valuable. But for my experience working with dance companies, it can feel very challenging to be able to communicate why what you do is important to the community. And so I think that that's really the number one thing that I would suggest someone who's trying to fundraise for a dance company work on, is figuring out how you can conversationally talk about your company and why it's valuable and what it brings to the table, and what makes you unique. So there are certainly a lot of dance companies, you know, out there, especially particularly smaller dance companies within the Boston community. And you know, what is different about your company? What makes your company unique? You know, just making sure that you know that, and that you're able to verbalize it and you're able to talk about it in a conversation, so that you can, you know, have that as a base point to start fundraising, because that's just really valuable to be able to explain why someone should fund your company and why what you do is so great. So that was my first one.
And you talked about, you know, being able to verbalize it conversationally, right? And I think that that comes up in a really important way in our next point about prioritizing networking, because a lot of us, when we hear the word network or networking, you know, we have this sort of antiquated idea of, you know, collect your business cards and, you know, walk around and hand them out and shake some hands, and that's the end of it. But, you know, that's not really, I think, what we need here when we're talking about networking, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So that ties really well into the next point on here, which is prioritize networking. And really what I mean by this is you want to know everyone and you want to have everyone know you. And so it's not, you know, going to a mixer and just handing your business card out to every person in the mixer, which I feel like a lot of old sales techniques perhaps go to that as a, you know, a method of, oh, I got to talk to everyone in the room. I got to give everybody my card. And that doesn't really give you the time to actually build relationships with people, I think. So I think when I say networking, yes, you should go to things. Definitely want to be going, you know, go to your Chamber of Commerce events, see if there's service clubs like Rotary or Exchange where you could go and talk, you know, meet people who are active in the community. But you really want to build meaningful connections with folks. So, you know, maybe you're only going to have conversations with 3 people, but they're lengthier conversations where you're actually, you know, connecting with someone, and they're getting to know you. And the reason why just people knowing you is so important, and you knowing other folks, is because people give to people who they know. You know, cold calling is really not super successful in most cases. And so the more people that you know, the easier it is to go to the folks that you know and ask for money. So that's, I think, why prioritizing networking is really important, and how you can do it. You know, what always has worked for me is just going to community events, going to other people's shows, I would say is, you know, important. Go, especially networking among dance companies, go to everyone else's shows, introduce yourself to other company directors, tell them about your company, but then also going out to the broader community for which you are located in, and just making sure that the people who are really active within your town or within your city, whether that's government officials or, you know, the heads of marketing of the big banks in town, you want them to know you, because that'll definitely come into play when you're looking for sponsorships and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, because I know it could be really intimidating to start asking people for money, but if you start off and it's really just relationship building and just having a regular conversation and kind of save the money ask for later, I feel like then when you actually have to do that, it's easier because it's someone that you met before, you've had a conversation, you feel a little bit more comfortable, and they, like you said, are probably more willing to help you out because they can put a face to, you know, whatever they ask it. So that's a really good point. And this next point, that thank profusely, I think is just like A+ advice. So can you talk about, you know, how we can do that and why that is so important?
Yes. So thank everyone and anyone in as many ways as you can who has ever donated to you. And so that, you know, anyone from $1 to $1 million should be getting thanked. And, you know, perhaps you don't have a ton of time to thank the $1 donors, you know, in a million different ways, but it really can be super simple to do this. So I would say, you know, try as much as you can to not just make it a form letter or an auto response email that someone gives you to donating. Try to make it personal. And by personal, like as an example, a lot of smaller companies are using Venmo to collect donations right now. You know, they might be somebody might be Venmoing you a donation. You can just hit that heart button and, you know, put a little emoji or whatever you want to do back to it. It takes 5 seconds, if that. And then somebody personally knows that you saw their contribution and that you appreciate it, which to me means actually a lot more than just an auto response email when I make a donation online. So I think keeping it personal is really important. And it just generally maintains a positive perception of your company. Even if donors who gave you $10 don't expect much, and they probably might not think, you know, they might not outwardly think, oh man, that company didn't thank me. Like, you know, that's not probably on the top of their mind on their day-to-day life. However, I think it does psychologically embed something in folks a little bit if they don't get that personal thank you. Even if they don't realize it themselves, it does alter their perception kind of deep down. So I think, you know, just making sure that everybody's getting some level of personal recognition that they made a gift to your company. That's where you're going to start to see the repeat gifts, is when people feel appreciated. So, you know, I could say personally that I've tossed, you know, $10, $15 to a bunch of different nonprofits during this time that we've been in with this pandemic. And a lot of them, I don't know what happened to that money. Did they get it? I hope so, because I never got any sort of, you know, response back. And I'm like, okay, you know, whatever, they're busy, it's fine, they don't have a staff. Like, I get it, I work in this industry, but I'm probably not gonna think, when it comes time for me to give again, they're probably not gonna be at the top of my list. It's the person who wrote back to me and said thank you who's gonna be at the top of my list, so.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Again, it kind of goes, it's an extension of the networking, right? Is like extending that thank you puts you on the radar and helps continue building those relationships. And then, yeah, when it comes time to ask again, it's easier to do that. And I think you made a good point about how social media has really helped to make those kinds of things easier too, right? So like just the like button on Venmo or tagging people in social media, like that's how you build your networking community. It's just another kind of layer that you can add on for that. So yeah, those are really great points on the thank you. And I love, Gracie, your note in the chat about investing in, you know, some nice stationery. If, you know, I think especially for larger donors, being able to send something tangible in the mail is always, it's old school, but I mean, it's really a beautiful thing to do. So I love that.
Who doesn't love getting a card?
I do. I love getting cards. I've gotten a lot of cards from Nicole and Karen from Monkeyhouse, and every time I'm like, oh, I got this like piece of mail. It's so special because, like, you know, people don't do that anymore. So yeah,
My
really,
fridge still has magnets.
I know. I still love to like put them out. And so this is a really good segue into our next question, which is, how do I begin to build a donor base, right? Because we're talking a lot about networking and meeting people and getting the ball rolling, but how do we do that, right? How do we even begin to kind of dive in? And I think the first thing is to just like go into your immediate area first, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was asked, you know, how do you begin building a donor base? Just what Jen said, starting with your inner circle, starting with the people who are closest to your organization. So you really want to build up a network of volunteers. You certainly don't want to be on an island as the company director by yourself trying to fundraise. You really do need a team that's invested in what you're doing to help you out if you're going to be successful. So you want to maybe start with building that network of volunteers. It doesn't necessarily have to be a board of directors, depending on the structure of your company and what you're doing, but just someone who, a group that can really, you can look to be ambassadors for your company and always on the lookout for you for opportunities and helping you make connections. So I would say, start by looking at your inner circle, and that's going to be different from company to company as to who your inner circle is. But I would say that your inner circle, hopefully, or ideally, is a reflection of who you aim to serve, is part of that inner circle. So in the example of OnStage, we're a company for adult dancers in Boston. We're really targeting working professionals who want to keep dancing after college. So that's our target market. And that's who our membership is primarily made up of. And that is what our board of directors is made up of. It's all designed to bring in more of these types of people that we are aiming to serve. So just consider that, whoever your inner circle might look different from company to company, but it could be your dancers. If you want to build up, you want more dancers, you want more members, you want more people to come to your classes. Like, think about what audience, what are you trying to do? And then that will help you hopefully build your network once you figure out who you're trying to attract. So that's one piece of it.
So, and the other thing too, because I saw Karen had made a note earlier about, it's a really good idea to ask people that you trust for help, when you're trying to design your elevator pitch, right? And so that, I think, fits in here with the inner circle, is like that those inner circle people can be the people as well who kind of help you talk about, what makes you special, what makes you different, what makes you stand out. That's one of the ways that they can assist. Yeah, I love that we're bringing up how to sort of, maximize your team here. So this next point, I love this point. I would put like heart emojis around this point because it really helped me understand my own board at OnStage, understand better how it works and why it works because of this topic here. So can you lead us into this, the 3 threes here?
Yes. So the 3 T's are a really nice basic board development fundraising principle. And so it, again, doesn't necessarily have to be a board of directors if that's not right for your organizational structure, but whoever this board is, or this kind of inner circle for you, who's going to help you build out your company, you really want to be thinking about these 3 T's here of time, talent, and treasure. And the reality is that there are not very many unicorns in the world who have all 3 of these things and want to be on your team of volunteers. So you certainly don't need to be looking for all 3, but you want to have representatives from all 3 of these areas to make up your inner circle. So an example of someone who has time, this could be the person who is, maybe doing all, keeping up with your bookkeeping, or opening your mail, or cleaning up your studio, or organizing your costumes, or, kind of doing these like nitty-gritty tasks that you really need help with. That's an example of someone who has time to help you out, but they might, they don't have a big wallet and they can't really donate much, but they have this time to offer you. So that's valuable. And an example of talent would be a specific skill that can help you in building out your company. So someone who has a fundraising talent is an example of a talent. I can use myself as an example, as someone who, when I joined the board of OnStage, I told Jen, look, I would love to help advise you on fundraising, but I don't have any time. I'm so busy. So that was kind of the situation that I was in, was like, I would be happy to be a fundraising consultant and help out where I can, but I don't have a lot of time to dedicate towards the nitty-gritty tasks. And so that's an example of that. And then treasure, the last one, this is really common, I would say, in a lot of bigger nonprofits. Probably some of the smaller nonprofits wish that this was more common, but you may have people in your board or your inner circle who just write a large check every year, and they come to one meeting and they never say anything, and you never really see them again, and they just pat you on the back and say, like, good job, and they don't have any time, they don't want to do anything, but they feel connected to your organization enough that by coming to that one meeting a year, that's what makes, being on the board, that's what makes them write the check. And so, you know, if you're, I think we all would like more of those, but that's just an example of like somebody who maybe has treasure to give, but not the other two things. So these are the three things I would say you want to try to look out for when you're building your network here, and just having the expectation that you're very unlikely to have everybody have all three of these.
Yeah, but I love that idea because I think it helps place or highlight the value that you can get from different board member. And again, we're using the term board loosely here. Again, you could be any kind of leadership or inner circle team. But I think it helps highlight that there's value in a lot of different ways, right? Like, sure, who wouldn't love somebody to write a big check for you every once in a while? But we have tons of dancers at OnStage who will do this sort of behind the scenes thing or help, you know, organizational things at the studio or whatever. And I mean, that stuff is really valuable, and it really adds up, and it really allows you to, you know, work on other projects or to maximize potential in other ways. And so I think that the time and talent shouldn't be underestimated, right? I think like it's just as important as the treasure component. So I love that it's outlined in that way. I think that's really brilliant. So yeah. And then Gracie, could we scroll down to the next one here? So we've been talking about, you know, Gracie and I have been talking about this concept of the micro community versus the macro. And so we've kind of touched on that, Melissa, here, talking about, you know, your inner circle versus your larger community. So, and the way that you reach out to those two communities or approach them or interact with them are, in my opinion, I think very different. So how do we tap into the micro versus the macro communities to strengthen our donor base from both of those angles and both of those communities?
Yes, yep. So there's this idea of these two different communities and approaching them differently. So micro communities are those who feel very connected to your organization and who are probably benefiting from what you do on a more frequent or regular basis. So an example of that could be dancers in your company. It could be those who are taking your classes, those who are regularly attending your performance, whomever is engaging with you and benefiting from what you do on a regular basis. And then the macro communities are real. I'm talking about the community at large, like your town or your city that you're a part of. You know, the businesses that are around your, let's say you have a studio space, the businesses around your studio space, you know, the big, you know, community banks in town, like the mayor of your town. That's kind of the community at large that isn't really engaging with you on a really intimate basis, but you still want them to know about you and support you. So the micro communities, those who are feeling more connected regularly, are certainly, I would say, low-hanging fruit in terms of getting them to donate. Most likely, it's probably not going to be the big, large sponsorship type donations. However, this particular community is really great to tap into for grassroots type of fundraising. You know, we need to we want to rent these great costumes for our upcoming performance. We need to raise $300 for that. Would you make a donation? And a lot of these people are probably likely to toss you $5, $10. You really don't need much of a pitch, honestly. They already know what you do. They like what you do. They take part in what you do. They want to wear those great costumes. Let's say it's the dancers. The dancers would love those great costumes on stage. Or, you know, they're like, yeah, I would totally support that. So you don't have to make as much of an intense pitch, I would say, with these micro communities. However, you know, being within the arts universe, the reality is most of us who are artists or who are enjoying art, a lot of us don't have big pockets. And so you're probably not going to get that, you know, $1,000 gift from this group. It would be great, but it doesn't happen as frequently as we would like. So where you can get those, you know, $1,000 larger gifts is from these macro communities. So, you know, grant opportunities, corporate sponsorships, that's what kind of can come from this macro communities. And so they need to be certainly approached in a very different way from your micro group, and that they really need to be buying into the value that you bring. So an example of, you know, if you're trying to showcase the value to the residents perhaps of the town where you live or the city where you live, you know, you want to build up that sense of pride. There's certainly a big sense of pride that comes from living in a community that has a theater or that has a dance company. And, you know, that really elevates the community. And like, we have arts in our community that really jazzes people up who own houses there. So that's a way to connect with the residents, is to pitch it in that sense. If you're pitching to a corporate level, you want to talk about, you know, the aligning yourself with these arts companies and why that's valuable for their marketing and for their brand. So that's a different type of conversation. So you really want to try to get to know, like, you know, adjust your pitch based on who you're talking to, you know, find common ground with them and to meet their need. So much about, you know, getting someone to make a donation to you is about them seeing a need being met that affects them. So whether it's an individual dancer who takes your classes and is like, I don't want this studio to close, so I've got to toss some money to them, or whether it's a CEO, you know, a marketing person or a CEO of a bank who's like, you know, we've got some corporate dollars we got to donate because it's required in our bylaws. You know, what's the jazzy place in town that we can get rid of this money, and, you know, and what are we going to get out of it? How's it going to, you know, get our brand out there? So these are just totally different types of audiences, and you just want to be cognizant of that and approach them differently. And the last point that I do want to mention here is, I really love the idea of hosting a community-based event, or making that a goal to do something with your company within the community that's public and free, like at least once a year, in the place where you are located, so that you are completely removing all barriers to accessing. There's no ticket price. It's not just for dancers. It's, you know, a public community type of an event where everyone can just come and see you. And it works really well for corporate sponsorships as well, because then you can push your corporate sponsors' names out to the community, and there's this reciprocation that's going on. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is, you know, what can I do at least on a yearly basis within my community to get my name out there and to just share what we do for free with everyone.
Yeah, I think that community element is just so important, and it's something that we often either overlook or we don't tap into as much as we should. And we talked a lot about this in our first webinar, which is posted on the OnStage YouTube channel. So if you didn't check it out, you should. A little plug there. But we did talk about how, you know, as dance company directors, you know, not being on an island, and you know, having to have support in different ways, and then expanding that to be within your community is so important. And I did want to add, just anecdotally, that, you know, starting out, that kind of idea of reaching out to community or businesses used to be really intimidating to me. And I was pleasantly surprised at how many were actually really willing to make small donations, even if it was, you know, like a small thing towards a raffle prize or something, all the way up to, you know, sending checks for sponsorship. I think, you know, you'd be surprised with how many local businesses are actually willing to send you something if you just put yourself out there and ask for it. And even if they can or they won't, at least you've built then some connection there. So maybe in the future, you know, if you ask, you know, however many months later, maybe they'd be more willing at that point. So, yeah. And yes, Grace, you make a good point that since we can't really walk in anymore and introduce ourselves, definitely setting up those email connections are really important. So
yeah. I mean, I'll share just like one little kind of I don't know if it's really an industry secret, but it's what I use to reach out to businesses in Malden. Is I go to the Malden Chamber of Commerce's website, and they have a business directory on there of everybody that's a member, and it has their phone numbers and their emails. It's public information. It took me, I actually, you had to put the work in to build the Excel sheet, because I had to like copy paste like a zillion businesses and their emails and contact information. But that's a great way if you're like, oh my gosh, my city is huge, like where do I even start? Like you could go to your Chamber of Commerce's website, they probably have a directory, and even if you're in Boston as an example, and that's just enormous and it's like too much for you to even process, you could, narrow down like, well, I want to look at the banks. I want to look at, you could, look at it that way and start figuring out like target businesses to connect with. And then every time we have an event, I just like blast out it to them from that Excel list, and we always get donations from that. Raffle prize donations, checks, just randomly people just mail in checks, and we're like, great. So that has worked really well for us. So if you, I recommend taking the time to do that. It does take some legwork in the beginning to like build the email list, but yeah, that's a good way to get started if you're looking for how do I connect without walking into a business.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you for all of your expertise and for answering that first batch of questions. So now we're going to take a pause. We're going to be shifting over. We're pausing to empower one another, which I invite Nicole to kind of be our lead on this batch. So Nicole, do you want to introduce the concept behind this slide?
Yeah, totally. So when we talked about sort of how to put this whole thing together, we talked about this idea of like our local community and then growing from your tiny community to the community, like the physical geographic community that you're in. And then we're going to be talking a bit more about the larger structure of how you are able to accept donations, which feels like a sort of giant leap. And one of the things that was really obvious to me and something that we really find to be super helpful within Monkeyhouse is to remember that we are all part of something larger than just our companies. It is so easy to get caught up in this chaos of like, oh my gosh, and I have to write this grant and I have to do this and there's only so many dollars, and really feeling like you are going through this by yourself. And even if you've created your own board, there's a whole bunch of us in this thing that are all in the same place. Like we're all trying to get grants. We're all trying to present work and to do all of these things. And so remembering that you can just call someone. Like if you have a question, call Gracie and be like, hey, you've been doing this a lot longer than me. I've got some questions about how you did this. Or, call anyone really within this list, because we're not doing this by ourselves. The word that Melissa used earlier that is one of my favorite words is to be an ambassador for an organization or a company or an artist. And I think in order for the community, the dance community, the world of dance at large, to have the infrastructure and the support and the facilities to be able to support all of us as individuals, it needs to be as strong as possible. So if all of us can go out and just be ambassadors for our community, so go out and see, as they said before, see each other's shows, but also like with every thing that you just set up for yourself to do for your company, think about how you can do that for somebody else. So you are putting together this elevator pitch. Okay, so you go to this party, you meet a person, they're like, I'm doing this thing that is only for people who dance with just their left foot. And you're like, well, I use both of my feet, but I know this person who only does dance with their left feet. You should meet them. And it's so much easier to talk about someone that's not ourselves. So find somebody, have a few people in your pocket that you can say, hey, this is a person that might be good for this opportunity that is not good for me. While you are sending thank you notes to the people who've donated to you, take a minute and send a thank you note to someone who donated to another company that you care about. Whether it is that like someone made a cake you happen to see online, that Gracie made a donation to Jen's company, send Gracie a note and be like, I think it's super awesome that you are supporting other companies in town. Or this entire workshop was created funded by the Malden Cultural Council. So one thing that is an easy thing to put on your to-do list is everyone should go home when they're done, go home like any of us leave our houses, when you sign off of this thing, and just send an email or find them on social media and just send something that says like, hey, I went to this thing, it was really great. I really appreciate how much you are supporting dance in Malden. I appreciate how much you are supporting OnStage and all of the work that they do. Because A, the more that they feel like what they're doing is helping a larger infrastructure, the more they're going to do it. And B, when you then apply to the Malden Cultural Council later to be like, hey, I want to do this thing in Malden, they're going to be like, hey, I remember that person. They totally sent me a thank you note, and you get like little bonus points next to your name. So there's a lot of reasons, both in the big level and in the small level, of why it matters when you do all of these things for yourself, that you take time to do them all for the larger community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole. And also what we would love to do, Nicole and Karen do this at so many shows, and we absolutely love it that they have the post-show conversation where we go around and we share the name of an artist that we know whose work we admire or who's doing an initiative that we really love and support. So in the chat box, throw the name and the Instagram handle or anything of an artist that you know and respect in the community, and then go and follow them, go and support them, go and see what they're up to. This is exactly what Empower One Another is all about, is bringing the artists together, learning more about what we're all doing, realizing that we're not alone, but that if we all come together, we're going to be so much stronger. And just a phrase that Nicole and Karen use that I absolutely love is the dance ecosystem. Like, well, you are a part of the ecosystem. You are, if you add to it, you make it stronger. There's some bio reference there, symbiotic relationships. So definitely add some chats. You can do it throughout. Put in as many artists as you like. That's what's great about this webinar format, and that you can keep typing and we'll go follow them. So.
And also be sure to put your own information.
And your own. Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. If you would like us to follow you, we would love to follow you and the other people who are watching this.
Yes.
Also we can compile what everybody puts in here and share it as text at the end of this as well. So put your stuff up there so we can all follow each other's stuff.
And you could even add a little bit about what your organization is all about, what other organizations are all about. So we'll be talking a little bit about the next webinar and how we'll tie all this in. So stay tuned. So I'm going to share a little story before we dive into the first question that I have for Monkeyhouse, which is a couple of years ago when I got to the point with Nozama Dance Collective. As I didn't really get to say before, we're a modern dance company based out of Cambridge. We focus on telling the stories of the average woman and stories that we don't necessarily get to tell very often. We're all about telling the stories of the experiences of women, the female empowerment movement. These are very important to us. And as we, in the beginning, we took the fundamentals that Melissa spoke so well to, and we got to the point where we got our first grant opportunity that required fiscal sponsorship. And so I emailed Karen and Nicole, and I said, hey, I really don't know what it means to be fiscally sponsored. Can we go out for ice cream, and can I just pick your brains and learn a little bit more? And that is one of my favorite stories because it is how we've built up such a phenomenal relationship. But I want to share it because it is not a bad thing to just ask. If a lot of this is overwhelming, ask any of us. But that they, not only helped me navigate the question, but helped me navigate that grant. It was an amazing conversation and amazing ice cream date. So I dive in. What the heck does it mean to be fiscally sponsored? And I will add a little tangent to this of why is that an important thing for an organization to be?
I can start with that. Just a quick kind of blip for people to know. I do have a weird health condition, and it is acting up currently. So if I make a face like I'm really upset, it's not you, it's pain. But in answer to the fiscal sponsor, a fiscal sponsor is really any nonprofit that is able to fundraise on behalf of an artist or group of artists, or even, you know, like organizations that aren't necessarily arts based. So you can have a fiscal sponsor who treats you and your program like one of their projects that they're fundraising for. And it allows people to be able to utilize all the resources of a nonprofit, the donors who get a tax exemption, the ability to apply for grants that are only open to 501c3s, the ability to connect with certain types of grants that are government-based that only allow artists who have a fiscal sponsor to apply to them. So it's a way of being able to leverage the resources that a nonprofit has for independent projects. And a big part of what fiscal sponsors normally do is kind of work with ideas at early stages. So for example, the community foundation in an area might start talking to someone who wants to start a nonprofit to be able to teach dance classes to kids. And when they hear about that, say to them, instead of having to start a whole nonprofit yourself, why don't you become someone that we can fiscally sponsor so that you can utilize your time and resources most effectively to really focus on the project that you want to build and not having to build the entire infrastructure of that. And then once you've had 5 or 6 years of doing that, then if you feel like, okay, now I've really got a sense of the programs and projects that I'm doing and have a sense of who the donor pools are, and those people are saying to me, this is a project that is really serving our community and we're growing at a rate that's bigger than what this first organization that we were part of can handle, that's a way to transition into building your own nonprofit. Although a lot of people stay as fiscally sponsored projects for their entire careers. There are a lot of artists, a lot of organizations that are either sole proprietorships or LLCs, which we'll get to in a minute, that are able to just stay as organizations that exist and use this symbiotic relationship with a fiscal sponsor. And for the record, we're really lucky that in the Boston area, the Boston Dance Alliance began about 10 years ago acting as a fiscal agent for dance companies. They have a fairly simple process of applying for that. If your work kind of extends beyond dance in more ways, if you do a lot of like theatrical types of projects, a lot of people also use Fractured Atlas, who are out of New York City, to be able to get their fiscal sponsorship with. But it's also important to realize you could have a fiscal sponsor on a project-to-project basis, like what Gracie was talking about when she approached Monkeyhouse, of I have a project that we want to be able to do, who is an organization whose mission might meet up with that. And because Monkeyhouse supports choreographers and supports projects that are helping emerging choreographers, when Gracie began describing the project that she was looking for a fiscal sponsor on, we knew that that fit within our mission and that that would make sense as a way for us to be able to help and work on that. It could have just as easily been someone who was like a Cambridge-based organization who is trying to bring more arts and particularly performing arts to Cambridge that she could have gone to be able to do that. And so as you're looking at who might be a fiscal sponsor, you might also want to look at who are people that I've worked with in the past that run nonprofits that might be a good fit for this project. And like a good example, Melissa was talking about the Boys and Girls Club. If you're someone who is new to doing community projects and has worked a few times with the Boys and Girls Club, doing things where you've been doing workshops for Boys and Girls Clubs in various communities, you might then want to turn to the Boys and Girls Club and say, you know, we'd like to build a concert that relates to issues and themes that have come up from our work with the Boys and Girls Club and some of the things that go on with the kids that we've been working with. And we'd really like to be able to make sure that there's a matinee performance that they can come to be able to be in the audience of. And what would it take for us to be fiscally sponsored by you so that we could create this concert? And then perhaps part of the fiscal sponsorship is also raising some money to be able to cover the cost of tickets for those kids to be able to come so that their families don't have to be burdened with that. And what that does is it both allows you to be able to reach a larger market, but by aligning yourself with an organization that has the reputation and the sense of impact that the Boys and Girls Club does, it lends a certain sense of faith in your work that is really important and may help to attract new donors who might not find you otherwise, and also introduces their donor pool to the people that donate to you. So it becomes something that's very good for both organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. With Nozama in particular, we do operate on a project-to-project basis like you talked about. So for dance organizations that are in the beginning stages of that is a completely, you don't have to jump to necessarily the BDA or to Fractured Atlas, but they also have a lot of resources if you're starting to think about it and you've been working in a project to project. So definitely look at their websites and see. We have those websites at the end for you to reference. Thank you so much. So as we move on to this next question about what does it mean to be a sole proprietor, first, what we're thinking is that as an organization, there are a number of different ways that you can structure your organization from a financial perspective, different ways that it impacts you from a taxes perspective. And so personally, I act as the sole proprietor for Nozama Dance Collective. And so this was a conversation that, Karen and Nicole and Natalie and I had recently of, as Nozama has been growing, what makes sense. And so as we go through the next couple of slides and we talk about the options for your organization, know that they might make sense for your organization at different years and different stages. So maybe when something makes sense for you now, another option might make sense later. So knowing kind of what all of these options are is really helpful from a grander perspective. So as we jump in, what does it mean to be a sole proprietor?
So a sole proprietor simply means that you are basically a self-employed person. And as a self-employed person, you can have people that work under you, just like someone who is a self-employed painter who does house painting may have other people that come and paint for them. So as a sole proprietor, what that really means is you are acting as the head of the business, and what that allows for is you can deduct things like any of the costs that you have for creating a concert. You can deduct for the cost of renting rehearsal space. You can deduct for what you pay your dancers, for what you pay out to your production people. It is something that in setting up your taxes, you have basically nothing that you have to do other than fill out the self-employment section of your taxes. So you don't have to register with the state. You don't have to do any filing of kind of like setting up your business. So it is a very easy way to be able to begin and start. What it does mean though, is that if you sign a contract with the dance complex saying that you're going to do a concert and you don't make as much money as you expected to make, and there's a deficit that you owe them, that you are then personally responsible for that money. It also means that if something happens, like someone in your company winds up being sick and not being able to perform, and so you have to cancel something, and then somebody who felt like they hired you says, well, we want the money back that we've paid you, or we want the money that we've invested into producing this, and so we're going to sue you, that you are personally responsible for that. So there is there is risk involved in this, even though it is easy to be able to get yourself into. There are ways that you want to think about protecting yourself, especially as you move through later stages of life. You do have to pay self-employment taxes, but as I said, if you keep good records on how you're spending your money, you can deduct all kinds of things from if you're using your home computer to be able to market and to reach out to people. You can deduct not just when you go and buy a computer, but you can deduct part of your internet sources for that. You can write off things like supplies that you have to purchase, not just the ones that are used in concerts, but if you're buying paper to be able to send out your thank you notes, those can be deducted. So all of those things you do want to be able to set up record keeping for yourself and be able to keep track of that. So when you get to the self-employment taxes, that you're only being taxed on what you specifically earned. The one last thing to keep in mind about a sole proprietorship is that if you are going that route, it is something that allows you at other stages, as Gracie was saying, to be able to change into something differently. So you could start as a sole proprietor, and then as you're working, if you begin collaborating with somebody over the course of several years, then you could set up an LLC together with that person for those projects, so that it's not totally dependent on you, which I think brings us to our next question.
That does. There we go. So what does it mean to be an LLC? And as a segue, I recently asked this question because I got married last year. And so, you know, all of a sudden I have to share things. And so maybe this organization that I have, you know, impacts not just me, but this other human that lives in my house. So Karen, what is an LLC, and what are ways that it might make sense for someone to consider that for their organization?
So it's a really excellent point about when you get married, when you have a kid, when you own property. Those are times when that risk that we were talking about in a sole proprietorship may make you want to do something that gives you a little bit more protection. And what a limited liability company is it is something that you do have to register with the Secretary of State for. And in doing that, you need to kind of set up what the framework of it is. And you can have a limited liability company and still just be the only person running it, or you could have a limited liability and be one of like 20, 30 people that runs that. It doesn't need to have a board or shareholders, but it does need to have a framework that's outlined for the Secretary of State to have an idea of how many people are involved with it. What it sets up for taxes as well is for the purposes of an LLC. Instead of now filing as a self-employed person, you are now, in theory, being paid through the LLC. And so you could actually be getting a 1099 through them. You could be getting a W-2 through them. And so that helps to make your taxes a little bit more separate from the taxes of the business. And it also allows for protections to a certain degree. And so if you have an event that is like an outdoor event that you're doing in a public space, and you have event insurance for it, you can take that out in the name of the organization. And then if something happens that's catastrophic, like a tree falls and it hits 3 people that are at the event, and they need to have hospitalization as a result of that, then the insurance will first kick in and cover that. And then after that, it's the LLC that is responsible for those debts. And so money that the LLC has can be used for that, but it won't go towards you and your individual assets. So for example, if you are a dancer who somehow as an independent person is able to purchase a house, if you were just a sole proprietor and that tree situation happened and the costs were greater than what your insurance was covering, or if you didn't get insurance, you were responsible for entirely, you could have to sell your house to be able to pay those bills for people. That the people that were suing you could come after that asset. But if you were a limited liability corporation, they could come after all of the money that the limited liability organization has, but they could not come after your home. And it's important to think about things like that as you start looking at plans for the future, because for a lot of us, when we start companies, we tend to be young and really just thinking about where we are now, and shifting into an awareness of the risk that we're putting our families at, putting our big pieces of property. For some people, it may just be your car. You know, those things that you want to make sure are protected so that you don't lose everything if something bad happens. And of course, I don't wish that to happen to anyone. It's just something to be thinking about, because I think a lot of times within the arts, we don't think of ourselves as business people in the same way as some of the other fields that people go into.
Absolutely. And so we have sole proprietorship, which makes sense for certain organizations. We have the limited liability company, and then we shift into what does it really truly mean to be a nonprofit? And this one I'm excited to dive into, because I think that it's something that we all ask ourselves at one point or another is, does being a nonprofit make sense for my organization?
So I'm going to start this one. One of the things that I think is important to mention here, because you girls are all like, well, we just came to this thing about fundraising and now we're talking about like starting a business, and I kind of missed where the transition was. I think the reason that most people believe that they should become a nonprofit is because they want to apply for things where they can get, that you can only apply for if you're a nonprofit organization, or you want to fundraise, and the only way you can fundraise is to have a nonprofit organization. Neither of those things are actually true. You can fundraise however you want. You can ask people for money and not be fiscally sponsored. They just won't get a tax. Like, that won't be written off on their taxes, but anybody can ask people for money. And if you want to give them a tax write-off, or you want to apply to those other things that only apply to nonprofits, you can be fiscally sponsored as either of those other two things that we talked about and be able to get the benefits of being a nonprofit. What a nonprofit is for when you are doing something that is about the outreach and not about making your own work. So if what your goal is to run a dance company, and that like you're going to put performances on stage and that is it, that is probably better in one of the first two categories. Whereas if what you want to do is be creating opportunities for people from all of these communities that don't have access to the arts and bringing them in to be part of something that you're creating, that is much more on the nonprofit side. There are a bunch more things that you have to answer to within a nonprofit. You have a board of directors and they own your organization. So even if you are the artistic director or the executive director, you still have to answer to them. So they could be like, you know what, you made this thing and that's super awesome, but we feel like you're taking it in a direction we don't want, and they are officially the people that are in charge. You do have to do a lot of registering with the Secretary of State and the IRS, and they, like having a company, you do have to file things for the company, but the company actually has to like file taxes. Like I have to do taxes for Monkeyhouse every year. And then I don't actually know a lot about the liability. Karen, do you want to take that part?
Sure. So with the liability aspect, very rarely are nonprofits facing the same type of lawsuits unless there is actual malfeasance on the part of the board. That is the one place that like a lawsuit can impact actual board members. For really large organizations, board members will actually have a specific liability policy that the organization takes out to protect them. So like the American Red Cross's board members will have liability clause that they're covered for. But for most smaller nonprofits, even if there is something that is a lawsuit that comes up, again, like the tree falling on a bunch of people, if it was beyond any insurance that people had taken out for that, or if the organization hadn't taken out insurance money to cover that, the nonprofit could be sued and lose all of its assets, but the individual board members would not be, unless they had been out the day before, noticed that the tree was kind of leaning and they just hadn't done anything and hoped that they would be able to get by in a tornado that way. You know, like then you could say they knew better and this was where they should have acted. But very rarely do the board members themselves take on a liability risk. And that's one of the things that is afforded to nonprofits, because all of the board members are seen as stewards who are like looking out for this cultural asset. And I think that that's one of the things that oftentimes within arts organizations we forget, is that even an organization like the Mark Morris Dance Company, what they are as board members kind of tasked with is being able to protect not just Mark Morris as the director of that, but to protect all of the works that have been developed during that period of time, to protect the building that he has had built now for dance in Brooklyn, to protect the costumes, the copyright, all of those sorts of things. And it is not about ownership in the way that even a limited liability or sole proprietorship is about what's being made or produced. And so one of the things that I often think is worth really considering before you go into a nonprofit starting point for building a company is really asking yourself how you would feel if the board decided that they didn't want you to be the artistic director, or if the board decided that they didn't approve a project that you wanted to do, because that's really a big difference between running your own business and being a nonprofit.
Awesome. So then I think one question that comes up for a lot of directors, and you kind of touched upon this, but just to dive a little bit deeper, is there a relationship between which of these structures is right for my company and how much money I'm able to gather from donations? Like, do I have to be one to be able to get donations in a certain way or a certain amount? You know what I mean? Like,
I do. And actually, you know, it's a really great question. The answer is you don't have to be one or the other. All three of them allow for people to raise money and to raise, you know, I would say infinite amounts of money, but, you know, I don't know what that really means.
because they're just infinite
you know,
funds.
But there isn't a cap or a limit to what you are able to raise. The bigger kind of thing about each of the different forms is who you are accounting back that income to, and who has the liability for the actions of that particular project. And I think one of the things that's really been helpful for the arts community has been the introduction of things like GoFundMe and other online spaces that any individual can use to raise money for something, that has really helped people to see that if you have a good cause, there's a lot of people that don't care about that tax exemption. If you're really interested in a band, there's a lot of people that are going to be willing to say, like, I will give money for you to create your next album, and they don't need that as something in return.
Especially when, you know, at a certain point, especially at the beginning, you're only asking for and receiving donations of a certain amount. So like, when was the last time you donated to someone something someone did on Facebook and thought about the tax exemption for your $10? Like, you just don't really think about that. Whereas if you were at a point of what I am doing is like, I on a regular basis get checks for $30,000 in the mail. A, I would very much like to meet you and understand how you did that. And B,
yeah, let's hang.
right? That is a very different level of donation from someone to have to be worried about whether or not you are going to then be fiscally sponsored or become a nonprofit in order to get those tax exemptions.
And I think along those lines, one of the things to keep in mind is that there's been significant changes to how deductions for taxes work in the last couple of years even, and that has really changed when you can even write off things on your taxes. And so it used to be that more people were paying attention to that because they could deduct things, but as those laws have changed, it has disincentivized people from needing the tax exemption, and it really makes it easier for independent artists to be able to raise money because people don't see that as really a huge advantage. And by having a fiscal sponsor for the projects that you can only get money through grants or that you really need grant support on, allows you to have the flexibility of access to that world and to that range of donors and funders without having to worry about creating a board, maintaining all of the accounting issues that go on of like what percentage of your donors does this and does this and does this, so that you can say that you've accounted for the common good, because it's all of these crazy, you know, algorithms to be able to make sure that you're still qualifying. To leave that to the nonprofits that can kind of be umbrellas for the arts ecosystem makes it a lot easier to just spend your time as an artist focusing in on the projects you want. Yeah, Nicole, take it away.
That reminds me that if you are primarily funded by one person or one family or whatever, you don't qualify to be a nonprofit, because you have to have like a certain percentage of your donors have to be from like broad support as opposed to just one person. So if you know that like I do this thing and largely the money comes from, you know, my parents who are wonderful in helping fund this thing or whatever it is, whatever, you have one giant donor and then like a few little donors, then that makes it very difficult to be a nonprofit.
Which, before we jump to the next slide, is just one little plug that I can make, is all the more reason for all of us that are artists that can't make large donations to think about making a lot of small donations to different organizations, because even a $5 donation to someone or a $2 donation to someone can actually be significantly helpful for those organizations to offset the really big amounts that they might get from a specific grant. That it becomes vital to them. And we often can feel like we don't have an impact, but those gifts are huge for being able to keep arts nonprofits afloat.
Awesome. So before we jump into this last question, just to kind of recap where we've come from. We started with the fundamentals of fundraising, really to help out with, you know, you're starting to build your donor base. And as you're able to build that donor base and start to think about what that offers your company on a larger scale and what organizational structure makes sense for you, you know, one of the main priorities of the Empower One Another series is to not only help support artists, but to help support sustainable organizations, to help you build the foundation, because we know that as you go through, you get to the 3-year mark, 5-year, 7-year, you meet challenges that make you feel like this is insurmountable. And so we want you to know that there are all of these check-in points, and you can always reach out to us to help out, to check in, see what's right for your organization, and these things do change. So where you are right now might not be what's best for your organization in a few years, but check in with us to be able to help you navigate that. I can speak personally that Nozama has had many of those conversations, so you are not alone. So as we jump into this last question, you know, what are some of the things that I can think about as I'm trying to figure out what's right for my organization?
Karen, you want to take that?
I was going to pass that to you, actually.
All right, great. So, I mean, much like Karen had mentioned, or Jen had mentioned for Karen back at the beginning, a lot of it is asking questions of what is it that you're looking to create? Are you looking to create performing company? Are you looking to do outreach? Are you looking to teach at a college or university? Or are you looking to offer free classes to X, Y, and Z communities? Is liability something that you're really worried about? Like, do you own a house? Do you have kids? Are you married? Any of those number of things will impact which route you go down. And then the words greater good sound like, what that means is like, if like we're all doing the greater good because we make art, but what those words actually mean in the definition for the nonprofit is that you are reaching out to communities beyond yourself, that you are doing the outreach, that you are getting support from a broad community as opposed to from a very small number of places. So what exactly is it that you are interested in doing? And then looking through those things, what are the choices that feel like they make the most sense? Karen.
One other thing when you're looking at fit is asking yourself if you know that you're in a place where you're living, where you're going to stay. Because as you design things, as a sole proprietor, you can move around from city to city, country to country, and not have to worry about how that's going to work itself out for you. As a limited liability, each state has kind of different rules and regulations around that. So once you form a limited liability, if the partners move to other states, there may be changes that they have to take on. And the same thing is true for a nonprofit. When a nonprofit gets incorporated, it's incorporated in a specific state. And so if you get up and move, you can't necessarily move these organizations with you with the same ease that you do as a sole proprietor. And so it's worth thinking about before you kind of go into the incorporation of any form, to say to yourself, do I think I'm going to be here at least for a couple of years? And then, you know, really be able to assess that, because that's a big part of fit that I think also is hard to predict your first year out of college. Yeah.
Similarly, not just to the staying geographically, but it takes a very long time to become a nonprofit, and then it takes a very long time to dissolve a nonprofit. So if you feel like, I want to have a dance company for the next like 4 or 5 years, but then I'm going to have kids and then I'm going to whatever, and I'm probably not going to want to have a dance company anymore, then leaning towards one of the first two, they're just easier to make happen and will make it easier for you for transitions. If you feel like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be doing this until I can't anymore, then that is a very different direction to look in.
And it's also important to note that there is not a hierarchy of which one of these is better or more valid for different forms. You know, I'm always surprised at kind of our sense within the dance world of that you have to be a nonprofit to be able to be successful. When I've known that there are many hip hop artists that instead of ever becoming a nonprofit, they stay as a for-profit sole proprietorship, and they are perfectly able to like tour and do things. And I've known a lot of organizations that have been able to stay as LCCs and really be able to kind of utilize that fiscal sponsorship to be able to kind of go back and forth with things. And even Twyla Tharp, when she was first forming her company of the thing that we think of as being Twyla Tharp, had both a for-profit version of her company and a not-for-profit version of her company, so that when she took on commercial jobs that weren't really going to be things that fit within the umbrella of what her nonprofit was designed to do, that she could take those on and her company members could be in an advertisement that had nothing to do with the mission of her dance company and get paid well. And that helped to offset the times when they were doing more jobs through the nonprofit that were community-based and paid them less money to kind of even out their salaries. And so again, it doesn't even have to be a one or the other. It can be something that you are a part of multiple forms of these companies.
Definitely. Thank you both so much for all of that information. And I want to just highlight before we go into the question section that these are some additional resources. We talked about the BDA and Fractured Atlas about fiscal sponsorship. Mass Cultural Council has a wealth of information as well. And then a couple more links if you have any further questions. And then of course, as I scroll down, do not be strangers. Email any and all of us if you have any questions, if anything was totally foreign to you, or just as you continue to navigate running your organization as questions come up, you know, don't be afraid to ask. I can't tell you how many times just asking a question has led to some really incredible things for my organization. So we want to jump into questions. There are no silly questions. You can ask about anything. We're going to say let's stick to specifically to the content that we talked about. As far as we know that there's lots of questions about specific grant opportunities and things like that. And you can definitely ask us personally. But as far as content from this webinar, definitely post your questions in the chat, and we'll stick around for a little bit if you have to jump off. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Melissa, Nicole, and Karen for joining and being our experts of the day. And as I'll come back to our references, but just as a plug, we have our next webinar on Sunday, August 9th at noon. This webinar is specifically geared to foster collaborations between artists, empower one another in non-COVID times. We would have collaborative rehearsals between companies to create new works and produce a performance, you know, not only sharing those work, but producing the work of those companies. In these times, we want to still foster collaboration, and we want to invite artists to come together and say, I'm looking for someone to do this with. I'm looking for someone who can teach me how the heck to produce a virtual performance. What does that look like? I'm looking for someone to collaborate and create an outdoor socially distant piece on this topic. Or you could join us and say, I'm looking for somebody who, I need a videographer for this project I'm working on, or I need someone to help us out with navigating some of these questions about fiscal sponsorship. So we invite you to come and join us. You can email us ahead of time with what specifically you're looking for, and we can play a little matchmaking, but come and join. And even if you don't have anything in particular, come and join and see who comes. And we will, I'm sure by the end of it, have some really exciting projects. I know that these are unsure times and people are trying to navigate what their company is going to look like. So even if you are an artist who's saying, I'm not quite sure what the fall is going to look like for my company, but I would love to be with some artists who are going through the same thing, this is also going to be a great space for you.
Yeah, and the good thing with this one too is, you know, our first two webinars have been very focused on dance company directors or people in leadership roles. And this last webinar is open to pretty much any artist, dance maker, mover, creative person. So this is a really good opportunity to practice some of the networking that we were talking about today and invite other people to join this, because the more people we have from diverse backgrounds and expertise and experience levels, I think the more rich these opportunities will be. And I've described this to Gracie. I think of this as like artistic speed dating. So, you know, the more people that we can bring to the table on this webinar, I think will open up a lot more opportunities. So I hope you guys will help us move forward on that.
Absolutely.
Gracie, one of the things that we had talked about the other day was possibly asking people to share their emails so that we can send them these information so they don't have to be like trying to madly type all of that information.
Yes. If you would like to, you can either, you can privately share your email with us. To make it easy, you could share it with myself, and I will hold all of the emails. And so I have a good chunk of your emails, but please share it. If you think that I don't have your email, please share it with me privately and we can reach out. We'll also keep you updated on our future webinars. And I will also share that we have our call to artists we're going to be doing a virtual Empower One Another performance. The call to artists deadline is July 31st. We're looking for artists who are going to be submitting work, either past work that you produced, you know, before that you would like to get more exposure for, or anything you've been working on, you know, in quarantine or outdoors, something new that you're producing, or something that you're excited about, we're going to be compiling this into a virtual performance. There's no minimum time. So if you have something that is 45 seconds, we would love to see it. The maximum is 6 minutes. But we invite artists of all genres. The theme is empowerment, but whatever that might mean for you, we'd love to hear your interpretation of it. So please, I will be posting back up on our Instagram handle the application for that and posting it on our page, and we'll be sharing that. But even if you don't have necessarily the produced video, if you're working on, we won't ask for videos until August. So you have some time if you've been working on something.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing your emails with me. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you to Melissa and Nicole and Karen.
I have
Thank you guys so much.
One more thing to plug. Monkeyhouse has started during quarantine a brown bag lunch series every other Sunday. And we've been covering a bunch of topics that are not quite the same as what we've been talking about tonight, but have tools and resources that people have been sharing along different topics. This week we discussed like who is your demographic and how do you reach demographics that are new to you. In the past, we've done some conversations that were about specifics of grant writing. And so if you're interested, it is open to everyone. Feel free to reach out to either Nicole or I, and we will get you all of the information that you need to have. Or if there are specific topics that you feel like you wish someone in the dance community would discuss, send us just that. We've had a couple really great things that have actually gotten us really looking at who isn't being served currently in the dance community and how we might be able to reach them. So feel free to reach out about that as well.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, everyone, have a wonderful week.
Bye.
And we'll see you on August 9th.
Yeah. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, OnStage.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.